Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Andrew Ziegler.
And I'm your host, Ben Lloyd Pearson.
Salesforce made its big play for enterprise vibe, announcing the launch of Agentforce Vibes. It aims to solve the challenge of using vibe coding in production by adding enterprise-grade security and governance. And it also introduces Vibe Cody, an autonomous AI agent that accelerates the entire development lifecycle, from code generation to bug resolution. And to help us break down what that means for development teams everywhere, we're welcoming Dan Fernandez, Vice President of Product for Developer Services at Salesforce. And Dan was a great guest, and I had a ton of fun talking to him, so stay tuned. I know you're going to love our chat. But before we get to Dan, we got to jump into this week's news items, and we got an interesting roundup for y'all this week. And I want to kick it off with a report that came across our desk about the future of tech leadership. It's a survey report from Riviera Partners that's been making the rounds in the last week about how AI is redefining readiness, strategy, and structure for teams. And according to that survey, AI is shaping their strategy more than any other trend. And this shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, matching many of the reports that we've been covering here on Dev Interrupted in the same light. But there were some interesting insights that emerged from this one. I know, Ben, that you highlighted a few of them. What stood out to you?
Yeah, so it's a pretty short report, so a really quick read it for our listeners to go check out. And it really focuses on like what organizations need for AI-driven software development. And one of the big highlights was things like the skills that organizations are looking for AI leadership. And in particular, they were highlighting things like tech skills that they need in leaders today. So things like pragmatic operators, visionary thinkers, being commercially aligned with AI. And I think it really shows like this need for both like forward-thinking skills coupled with the ability to apply AI in real-world commercial needs. And one of the big things that this report pointed out was that most companies today really just aren't structurally ready for AI. And this was based on C-level ownership, board engagement, cross-functional collaboration, and their hiring behavior. And the report pointed out that the biggest things holding companies back are things like talent gaps, lack of executive fluency, and just unclear ownership and accountability.
Yeah.
And they were saying that the companies that are ready to leverage AI have done so by explicitly hiring leadership roles who are responsible for leading AI innovation within their organization. And this ties really well into what we've been saying here on Dev Interrupted, and that is that 2025 is the year of disruption. As we all experiment with AI and we learn to navigate with the complexities of the new norms of the AI-driven era. There's new patterns that are emerging, there's new roles being created, and there's a whole bunch of new skills that are being prioritized within organizations. And the challenge is that these changes take time. It doesn't happen overnight. And in my opinion, I think these trends are going to solidify over the next 6 to 12 months. And, if you look at places like LinkedIn, Indeed, you can already sort of see like some of that starting to solidify because there's all sorts of like new leadership positions that are starting to pop up with AI in the title, specifically for engineering. So these are like C-level, VP, director level roles with titles that have things like AI productivity, AI innovation, AI strategy and transformation. And right now, the titles and job descriptions, they kind of seem to be a little bit all over the place. And the roles are sort of split between like internal transformation and product development roles. And I think over time, like these titles and descriptions will standardize. But for now, I think if you're someone out there who's listening to this podcast and you have a lot of AI skills and you're looking to advance your career into a leadership position, there's actually a lot of companies that need someone like you. So if you're looking for a change in, maybe you want to look for a new opportunity, or maybe you want to stay where you're at, but you want to help your organization level up, it's actually a really great time to start looking for new opportunities, new positions to help organizations really just jump into this AI transformation. So it's a great time if you have those skills, and organizations really need the help of people like you.
Yeah, what stood out to me was how it split companies into high readiness and low readiness based
Yeah.
upon AI initiatives that they had internally, and then how that translated into behaviors and actions that company did. And that correlated directly to a huge number of those roles, like 3x, times the amount of roles as a low readiness organization on average in terms of hiring around AI enablement, around AI solutions. And really, when we say this, it's companies starting to connect the dots between their AI experimentation and the value they can extract from it. You said very well that 2025 has been a year of experimentation and figuring out what works and breaking things. And now that we've broken things, we're starting to put things back together and build a new future. And understanding how these processes work is, it's matured pretty dramatically over this year. There's still a lot that's going to be developing in the future, but folks are holding on. It's like a bull in the rodeo, and some of them haven't been thrown off yet. So if you're that person and you find yourself mastering these skills and being somebody capable of riding that bull, I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for you. So you should keep your eyes peeled for how you could translate your skills in the future.
Yeah. Now I'm going to admit this next story really got a big eye roll for me when our producer Adam put it in our queue, titled "Stop Avoiding Politics." But then I read it and I was like, oh, this is actually a really great article, and I'm glad we get to talk about it today. So tell me about it, Andrew.
Yeah, I had the same exact reaction. I was like, oh, wait, a political article. This has got to be the wrong one in here. But then, once we read it a little closer, this amazing article from Matthias Lima about work politics really highlights the importance of the interpersonal dynamics within a team and really calls to action those engineers that tend to shy away from those responsibilities and actions to really take full control over their destiny within their companies. And ultimately, what this boils down to is being able to navigate that invisible network of relationships, influence, and power that's within every organization, within every team. And you could ignore it or refuse to participate in it, but in no means does that mean it goes away. And so he laid out some really great advice for what good politics at work, what it really means. Don't turn up your nose or shrivel your face at the expression, but instead use politics as just another mode of communicating with your team and expressing your value. So building relationships before you need them was a standout one that I really resonated with as somebody who really loves to understand what people are good at and how they could work together. I think that identifying the skills around you, even if you don't need them immediately, is incredibly useful in a really future-proof capacity. But also understanding what incentivizes those people, really getting to the root of why does your coworker wake up every day and come to work? What are they passionate about? What are they trying to fix? And ultimately, this comes down to empathy, which is a skill that all engineers have to master. This comes easier to some than others, but ultimately being able to put yourself in the shoes of your coworkers helps you create these win-win situations for everybody and elevate above what you would consider, bad office politics. And so ultimately, the takeaway from this is to be visible and don't shy away from hard conversations. I think we're all well equipped with expertise to really bring the bat here. And there were some really great lessons there.
Yeah, and I think these lessons are really more important than ever in the AI era because, coding is no longer a differentiator. Anyone can generate code, from developers to marketers to salespeople. So it's really not something that sets anyone apart anymore. And sure, you can differentiate yourself with higher level technical thinking, architecture, system design, those sorts of things. But really, I think what it comes down to is soft skills are more important than ever. So strategic thinking, product vision, understanding customer needs. But more importantly than all of those things, I think communicating all of that to internal and external stakeholders in a way that aligns those other people with your efforts is more important than ever. And I like to think of progress sort of in terms of in-dimensional space. So imagine that your company is sitting in a boat, in the middle of a lake, and you want to move that boat in a certain direction. But the problem is that everyone else on the boat might want to move that boat in a different direction than you. And that boat is going to move in the direction that boat is going to move is going to be determined by the sum of all the effort that's being exerted upon it. So, for example, if 50% of the company is pushing north and 50% is pushing east, the boat is going to move to the northeast, for example. So if that's your goal, then perfect. You're going exactly where you want to go. But if your goal is to move west, then you're actually going the wrong direction, and you're going to have to convince people to move in a different direction. And not everyone needs to move exactly the direction that you want the boat to move. But creating that force to start moving that boat in the direction that you want it to move doesn't happen overnight. You need to spend that effort over time, realigning the priorities of others to convince them to push towards your objective. And, my last piece of advice, like if this is something that, really scares you or really concerns you, and it's not something that you're comfortable with, getting into these soft skills and into the politics of working within an organization, my advice is, don't be afraid to ask like your favorite LLM for advice. Like it actually can be pretty good at providing like personal coaching advice. We recently, as a team, did a little bit of personality testing, just to lift the veil a little bit. And I've actually been playing around with like, how does my personality interact with this personality? And it's actually really enlightening when you can just like sort of break down these like interpersonal relationships into like, as an engineering background, I really like to break things down into very logical steps. Like, and an LLM can actually really help you just sort of like break down these complex interpersonal relationships into really practical steps that you can sort of just apply to your life. So if it is something that scares you, don't be afraid to seek out help, whether it's from an LLM or someone that you trust. So it's a great article. If politics is something that you would like to get a little bit more knowledgeable about, I encourage you to go out and check out this article.
Absolutely.
What's our next article, Andrew?
All right. So this next article is a fun scoop about where our AI chat experiences might be going, or definitely will be going in the very near future. So before I introduce this, I want to have a flashback for a minute. Earlier this year, I sat down with Andrew Hamilton, the CTO of a first of its kind MCP agency, and he talked with me about the upcoming enshittification of the AI experience. And this was really fascinating to me. The idea that up until now, you're in ChatGPT, you're in Claude, and you have your conversations. There's no ads. There's nothing that's distracting you. It's you and the chat and the code and you're singing, right? But ultimately, these experiences, they degrade over time, right? We're familiar with this with the internet in a phenomenon called enshittification. And enshittification is coming for AI in the same way that it came for Google search. I know many of our listeners will remember the days of Google search where you type in a query and the first thing you got was an organic result that best matched your query. And then eventually there were ads on the right. But now over time, ads have eaten the whole page. They're at the top, they're at the bottom. And now on top of that, you get AI summaries, right? And so this whole experience is really kind of, it's gone sideways in more ways than one. So the enshittification of AI is here with the Agentic Commerce Protocol, or ACP. And this is an emerging new protocol that allows you and your chat and your interface to surface things that you can buy from stores and then actually complete the transaction without leaving your chat service. So we're talking about making a query like, oh, can you help me find a shirt of this color or size? Or can you help me find a gift for my friend who loves turtles? And it's going to maybe do a search across the sources, the shops it has access to. We're talking about sourcing from maybe like leading stores from retailers, but also things like Etsy or eBay, right? And you know what you're going to get? You're going to get a handy little buy button right there in the AI experience. So these UI evolutions of AI are here. I have a lot of thoughts about this. And, when I sat down with Andrew this year and he put this idea in my head, I hadn't stopped thinking about it. So it's really wild to see it now come true so quickly. But Ben, what is the first thought that comes across your mind when you hear about something like this?
Yeah. I mean, look, maybe this will be an amazing, life-changing feature, but we all know the enshittification is coming at some point. This could be just one of many steps along that journey. The reality is this infinite money glitch that everyone's talking about with AI, where the VC money just keeps flowing through all the companies that are caught up in this technology. It's not going to last forever. These companies are going to have to find ways to monetize the experience more so that they stop losing money. And ads will almost certainly be a part of that. Like finding ways to monetize your experience within the product will certainly be a part of the changes that happen. And I think what we really need to take away from this story, beyond like the monetization of these platforms, is that AI is changing constantly, changes every single day, every week, every month. And what you build today, you have to expect that what you build today is not going to perform exactly as it will, or it's not going to perform the exact same tomorrow. So if you're building AI products, or if you're building internal processes on top of AI, you need to have experts within your organizations who are constantly evaluating models, investigating the latest and greatest tools, and ensuring that you're choosing the best tool for the job at hand. And a trend that I've started to see recently is that the leading companies within, whatever industry it is, they're taking these opinionated positions about all of these things rather than leaving things like model choice up to the end user. And I think every company now should have a team that's leading this. Like, you should have your internal AI experts that are making decisions about what the best model is, what the best AI platform is, so that as all of these technologies are changing rapidly, you're always staying on top of what the latest technology is.
Yeah, I couldn't
Yeah,
agree more.
yeah. So I think
It's
we
like
got we
I will
go
say
ahead.
though on this last end, if you're working anywhere near agentic commerce protocol, or if you have a different prediction about where this is going to go, I'd love for you to prove me wrong. Please
Yeah.
come find me, or let's chat about it, because I'm pretty much in the hot seat on all things around model protocols right now. So I'm really interested to see how this one shakes.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we've got one more really fun story about a game that I have loved for a long time, and now that I have kids, I love even more, and that is Minecraft. So what do we have going on here, Andrew?
Okay, yeah, I've been stoked this whole news segment to finally get to the Minecraft story. So, this is highlighting a video that came across our feed about I built ChatGPT with Minecraft Redstone. And for those who aren't familiar with Minecraft, Redstone components are Minecraft's version of electricity and logic gates. You can use them to react to actions and states of other components, but notably, it's Turing complete. So you can solve any computing problem with sufficient time and power. And at first I thought this was going to be clickbait, right? It's like, who has time and who would have built this? But they literally created a GPT transformer using only redstones inside of Minecraft. Some of the comments of this really, in the comments, really stood out to me. My favorite one was, imagine the existential horror of finding out you're a Minecraft build. And we're talking about an LLM that you can query directly within Minecraft itself. The video even has example queries where you get a response. So we're talking about an agent inside of Minecraft that's living on your computer. Pretty hilarious. And it actually reminds me of, you know, GPTs under the hood. They transform things into numbers. They find the relations between the numbers and they spit out an output that we can understand. And there's a really amazing course. Spreadsheets Are All You Need by Ishan in Anand that actually rebuilds GPT-2 in Google Sheets, so you can intimately understand how transformers work. They're not something that's completely mystical that an average person can't understand. So if you have any interest in replicating this bizarre build in Minecraft or anywhere else, maybe you want to whip this up in Roblox, for example, I definitely recommend you check that out. It has a lot of amazing resources, and we're going to include that in our roundup. But Minecraft is, I know, more Ben's field than mine. I know you're a big Minecraft nerd. So what did you think of this one?
Yeah, well, I love that you also mentioned the Google Sheets example as well, because I often think that Minecraft is an overlooked educational tool. So I think it's a really cool project that could have some really awesome real world use. If you wanted to go teach somebody about how this stuff is built, and I would
Yeah,
love to see something like this get used in an educational setting. So, um,
absolutely.
yeah, and from the looks of it, it's like basically equivalent, like, in capabilities to Smarter Child. If anyone out there remembers this chatbot from the early 2000s that was in
Yes.
AOL Instant Messenger, I used it a ton when I was much younger. Uh, yeah, the video is super short. Our listeners should go check it out. I would love if now I could coin let's call it the Ben Lloyd Pearson law. No matter how good you are at Minecraft, there's always somebody out there who is better than you. Like, I'm just constantly amazed at what people can do with Minecraft. Like, it's incredible.
Yeah, this one truly blew my mind. So, definitely share your thoughts about what you think about this Minecraft build, and if you manage to one up it, please come let us know. We'd love to love to share it here.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I think that's our news round for the week. But stay tuned, because up next, I'm sitting down with Dan Fernandez of Salesforce. Vibe coding. For many developers, it's the dream. Rapid prototypes, creative freedom, building at the speed of thought. But in the enterprise, it can sound more like a nightmare. That creative freedom can translate to shadow IT and data leaks and a graveyard of abandoned code. And the question is, how do you get all of that speed without creating a legacy of risk? And today we're finding out how to get the best of both worlds with Dan Fernandez, Vice President of Product for Developer Services at Salesforce. And Salesforce is pioneering a new category that they call Enterprise Vibe Coding, or EVC, designed to blend that agile creativity with enterprise grade safety.
And today we're digging into how they make it all possible for the teams that build in the same house as their data and put a saddle on the wild, wild horse of modern development. So, Dan, welcome to Dev Interrupted.
Well, that's a great intro. Thank you so much. Really happy to be here.
We're stoked to have you here as well. We've been covering how enterprises are using new coding tools and agents that build software. And Salesforce has a massive scope on the amount of users and developers that come in and use this software. So I'm really interested to dig into this today. And kind of to kick things off, I called it a wild horse. I called it the wild, wild west. You and I chatted about this a bit before. And, that's the truth right now. Developers and engineers, they can spin up prototypes in minutes. Everyone's drowning in POCs now. I mean, honestly, leadership starts to worry more about safety and control more than innovation. And you've described enterprise vibe coding when we first talked as agentic development with governance. So how do you define enterprise vibe coding so it really resonates with an enterprise buyer?
Yeah, it's a good point. So I think one of the areas, my team builds Agentforce for developers. That's our natural language apps. It uses frontier models, model context protocol. It can build specifications or just do it. Has the RAG services, all those capabilities. But there's specific areas that you need for the enterprise. And, our goal is to democratize development. How do we make every Salesforce user be able to use AI tools to, build, debug these apps? And sort of differentiating because people sometimes have that nails on the chalkboard with vibe coding as a term is really sort of how do we think about taking the best of both worlds. And some of the challenges that we have for regular vibe coding and really sort of the differentiation is the new apps versus existing apps or existing code. So you go into a tool like, Lovable, Replit, Vercel V0. These are, awesome tools and it's, kind of fun. You just tell it what to do and, you see it. One, it's almost always building greenfield, meaning new apps.
Yeah.
Everything it's doing is using new as opposed to existing. There's some great stat where it's like 80% of real development or actual development is extending something or just doing glue between pieces that already exist. And you become more like a plumber, for lack of a better word. So really not just supporting new apps, but also supporting existing apps, brownfield applications. You need to support both. I think the other part is that corollary is that reuse versus reinvent. So all that's really trying to say is within a company, and again, if you're just a startup and there's no existing code, that's great. But an enterprise has years and years of existing code, of hardened APIs, of services, of libraries. How do you reuse that? And one of the key things you need to do is have that retrieval augmented generation system, having that context for this is what our enterprise uses. This is the schema that we're doing. These are the approved blessed APIs and things like relational data, semi-structured data, all the data sources that you're getting from to really optimize that scenario. But that's the challenge. All those other tools don't have that. So we really need to think about, from an enterprise perspective, focus on reuse versus reinventing. Your team's built a bunch of this stuff. You're going to tell me I have to rebuild that. If you just vibe code into some app, it's rebuilt the tax calculator. It's rebuilt, the shipping calculator. It rebuilds our inventory service. We already have those components, right? So you don't need to rebuild those. You really want to reuse those. And the other part is just all the governance. There's a huge set of tools. You don't necessarily want to vibe code, your financial information, your medical history, right? So how do you make sure you have all the governance and things that we, Salesforce specifically, does a phenomenal job at? So that's HIPAA compliance, Sarbanes-Oxley, auditing history, granular access control, audit history, anomaly detection, and so many things around the governance. And then lastly is that agentic DevOps and quality, right? So we're doing a number of things where like, hey, you vibe code this. I kid you not, I'm not going to say who it was. There was somebody that sent a message today. Check out my cool demo. And it was like almost like a joke. They sent a local host link, right? So clearly they don't have this. And it's the agentic DevOps tools are getting great so that you can reuse so much of what you have from a DevOps pipeline. And that means Salesforce has things like pre-production environments, sandboxes, tools to do things like quality gates, tools to validate code. And that can be agentically built or hand built, because you too, I know, certainly not us on this call, but other developers could have a security issue, a performance issue, a scale issue. This is going to catch it from any source and make sure that you have high performing, high scale code.
That's a great place to start this at the very top, is just recognizing the space in which engineers at an enterprise level are working. Saying it's more like plumbing is a really great metaphor, I think, because you have these parts that are already built largely in whole. And a lot of times when we attack new problems and build things within the enterprise, we are connecting the dots between the things that already matter to our customers. And it's important, in fact, that we don't reinvent ourselves, because that's how we push ourselves out of a fit for our customers. But then also we move away from the security, the reliability, and honestly the magic that makes your product what it is. If you're reinventing it over and over, that's a luxury only like an AI native startup that's still trying to find product market fit has. And so it's a whole different set of problems. And ultimately, it really orients everybody around this idea of reuse and understanding this, like what's already at hand. And we're going to talk about that a bit, because that's the great thing about Salesforce and building inside Salesforce is it's where your data lives. It's where your systems already live. And so there's a lot of reusability that you can play with. And kind of at the top too, because of that, there's a lot of guardrails that you get to be able to set up. Because Salesforce is, it's the home to their data, but it's also where a lot of people in the enterprise, a lot of people at scale are going to look to get the source of truth and to understand like where the company is going, pull reports, build new products. So how does, what are the kinds of guardrails that can exist when you take that vibe coding idea, but you supplant it within this firmly like rigid structure of Salesforce?
Yeah, it's a pretty multifaceted question. So I'll try and give like the quick or some of the highlighted things to go through that everybody really resounds with everyone. One of the key areas that Salesforce does is makes a great set of tools for pre-production environments. Those are called sandboxes. So instead, a lot of times developers have to like, oh man, I have to build a new environment and it's going to take me all day to build this from scratch. I have to read this code and then write the script. Sandboxes basically say start with production and make a copy of it. And you can choose, do you want just the metadata, the structures of the data, or do you want all the data itself? If it's all the data, it's called a full sandbox versus just the metadata, which is sort of like the developer sandbox. Like on a day-to-day perspective, we'd have our own developer sandboxes. And really making that a first-class citizen means that I have a safe environment to test my AI on, as opposed to, you see some of these examples where the agentic tool literally deleted a production database, right?
Oh yeah, we've all read that story. We covered that here on the podcast too.
Yeah. So you probably don't want that, right? So that's sort of like step one. And there's just a number of other things too. The Agentforce for Developers tools. One of the key things we did was partnered with our friends at Klein, the open source tool that brought a number of capabilities, and we built on top of that our Salesforce capabilities. So that does include one of my favorite features, which is checkpoints. This is like the AI did something and it just replaced all the CSS that I spent the hour building. What is going on? And you have that checkpoint that you can revert quickly, right? That's sort of like, okay, great. I didn't mess up. We talked about like not messing up the production org. Now we haven't messed up our code, if you will. So having that checkpoint is a great area. And I think some of the other things are model context protocol tools that we do. So we're going to ship our own set of MCP tools that make it really easy to work with Salesforce and make it that much safer. So it doesn't randomly guess. It's using our pre-built tools. And then the last thing is obviously a set of agentic rules. And this is really what I think everybody's discovering is sort of the secret sauce for how you can tell and really do the governance. So if I'm a team lead, I am telling you everything I want to do, whether it's those style rules or we must use this framework, or you know what, don't AI, ignore this folder. This is our legacy folder. We don't want to change this. I don't want to, rebuild 30 unit tests for this legacy thing. And you have those sort of granular controls that are cascading as well that you can use there. And then lastly, all the stuff that are in the platform fundamentals, field level permissions, audit history, access control. There's just a ton of stuff that you can do within there. And then specifically for, we have a product called DevOps Center that allows us to do a DevOps pipeline. It uses GitHub as the back end. And within these builds, we want to make sure that we have quality by default, right? So when we ask it to build something, it's building unit tests for it. It's suggesting code analysis runs for it. And it's making sure that when the output is built, it's built. We're not just building the artifact, we're building the way to validate the artifact is correct and using agentic reasoning like, okay, yes, we know it's built. And then the last mile, what we call quality gates, which is you can define, it's the bouncer, if you will. You want to get in, you must be this tall, you must pass this % of quality tests, you must pass, there is no Sev 0 on the code analysis tool. And our code analyzer tool, for example, is actually an aggregation of 5 different engines, right? Everything from PMD to ESLint, some of the best open source tools for Salesforce and web tools that it runs, and you can set like, hey, no Sev 0s. Or you know what, we'll take a Sev 2 on this one because we really want to make sure that, or a Sev 3, that all docs must have / comments, right? So you want to make sure that something is blocking, and you can control those at a really granular level with our quality gates. And sort of those guardrails from, we're going from an individual, which is building things, their environment, they can make sure their code is okay and their org is okay. Then what we're doing is making sure, hey, how do we set this across a team? And these are some of the things that we're still thinking about how the best way to do this. And AI rules are a great example of where we are codifying what we want to do for a team perspective. And then across all team members, this is the bar that all code needs to get in, whether it's manually built or AI built.
So those are some really great points that kind of frame what makes it strong. And I want to like walk through some of them because there was some really great stuff in there. So one of them being, meeting the developers at the experience that they not only like expect, but they need in order to build these tools. And that means, providing things like these, many would almost call these sandboxes like ephemeral environments, right? Being able to create clones of production and pull in certain things and scope them out. And we all know that AI is really great at scaffolding out those kinds of things, making the blank page upon which you write. And so that's like a first-class citizen, I think, in building in the AI world. You have to have that. Another thing that's like really important is bringing in all of the actual within the actual experience, actually using like the primitives of manipulating the AI. Like people have like agents.md, right? You have all your best practices for how the agent should do it. Oh, we use this linter, or oh, we have to have this kind of style, or everything that has this preamble in front of it. And those details are small, but in the enterprise, when you're building these tiny little building blocks that build up to be these huge structures, those are huge force multipliers, and you have to have them in a repeatable way. They need to be scoped, so those are 2 really big important things, is having those ephemeral workstations so that you can spin stuff up, and when you mess it up, you can roll back to a checkpoint. I can't even tell you how many times I've clicked the restore checkpoint button in Cursor, and if it wasn't there, I would not still be using it, because it's really important to be able to experiment with these tools and to try out new stuff. And when you're working on enterprise grade software, that's really scary. When you start going down this one road, it can be really easy to over rotate on something, or, oh, we'll try to fix this problem. And in doing so, you introduce 5 more. Oh, wait, let me just go back to when I introduced this problem in the first place and see if I can even prevent it from happening. So these are all the kinds of things that people are already doing. But this last one that you said was really interesting, because I haven't heard a lot talk about it, because a lot of organizations don't have this need of almost having this like bouncer. Like we're all talking about the AI code review tools, or the AI agents that work asynchronously, and they review your work and they tell you it sucks or doesn't follow the guidelines of what you expect. But like actually having the rigid checklist and then a system in place to enforce it, it helps keep all of those first 2 parts like all in line. So now you have a system that the engineer can work reliably through, and it likely saves them a lot of time being able to iterate in that way. Have you all been able to kind of experience a flow of development once everyone's locked in on all 3 of those kinds of controls?
Yeah, I think so. And remember, this is a granular set of controls for.
Right.
Imagine we're in an enterprise. The finance team is going to have some of the most rigid rules, right? Everything must be an audit history. Everything must have a unit test. We need to do these things. We need to sign off and yada yada. But there's other categories where there's departmental apps. And hey, that's more like just what we're doing for internal planning. And it is we're going to build a set of tools for sharing specs. And it's going to be and you're going to allow for upvoting, downvoting, discovery, and all these wonderful things. Maybe that doesn't need that level of rigidity that you have. And then there's other ones where it's more like it's really is a new sort of category, that personalized productivity that I call personal apps, which is I'm
Yeah.
just building for me, right? I'm just like
Mhm.
almost testing just in localhost. So you can choose how much of a quality gate you want on a per app basis, and it gives I call it sometimes the federal, state, local. Everything you check in must follow, and some companies do very high federal set of rules.
Oh.
Some do, hey, this is going to be the set of federal rules. The good examples would be like state, like finance is going to have state rules, right? Like you must do this for finance. The personal app is more like local. Hey, we're going to do whatever we want, and we're going to use this framework, and it's sort of just get the job done. So you, at a granular level, can choose how many of these gates that you want. Is your organization one where everybody decides things that's sort of top down on a federal level? Or is it more like, hey, it's actually on the team business? The HR team, finance team, they're going to have the most biggest rules that are going to be more like state driven, if you will. Or it's just, hey, anybody can do anything. And then there sort of are no rules. So but you need those levels of granularity, which is where you stop it. Is it all code, or is it code for specific applications or specific business processes that you want to say? And what you need to do is just have tools that are flexible to have different DevOps pipelines and different rules within there as well.
Yeah, recognizing like the impact level of the software you're building is critical in this world that you're talking about. Like we've talked quite a bit about like personal software in the rise of AI coding here on Dev Interrupted. We recently had Lee Robinson of Vercel talk about V0 in that exact way, how you
I
can
love
spin
it.
up that personal software on demand, right? That's like that local level that you described, right? And then going up one level, you kind of have like the lovables if you're trying to build a business and trying to get like a larger thing on top of it. But up until this conversation, there's not a lot of talking about this like cloud, like up in the clouds layer that we're talking about, this like federal top down and very rigid. And that is ultimately like the core of our conversation and the opportunity that Salesforce is going after. And
Right.
something I want to ask is because, building with these tools as an engineer, it's fun to experiment. Building a company on top of them, it's fun to spark up something new. But how does a company as like rigid and high impact as Salesforce and with a high need for security and compliance and control and safety, how do you not only recognize that there's a market opportunity, but how do you get over that whole, oh, we're gonna wait and see a little bit more how it plays out. It's so tempting and especially at that scale, I think, to do so, to wait and see what the smaller players do. You have all the resources and time. So how did that conversation really begin at Salesforce that, y'all said, okay, we really need to bring this to market for our users?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So it jumps back to some of our team members, Wade Wagner, that brought me to Salesforce about 5 years ago. And they were building Salesforce developer experience. They really wanted to have a first-class experience for building on Salesforce platform. And out of that came a number of things, which is certainly well positioned us for this, which was we built a browser-based version of VS Code. So much like Cursor builds a fork of VS Code, it's only available on the desktop. We have our own fork of VS Code called Code Builder. We are one of the companies that started, that helped found the Eclipse Foundation for OpenVSX, which
Mm.
allowed for a VS Code marketplace, along with like Google and a number of others, so that you could share extensions. Why? Because Microsoft closed down that marketplace and said, and everything is a VS Code extension. we ship everything we do for our developers within our Salesforce extensions for VS Code. And so we had a number of the capabilities there that we were really doing, and we're really just trying to make developers more productive. And we had the first versions of our code analysis tools. So it became a really logical thing, which is, hey, what are the things that we can do to increase developer productivity and quality? And that's sort of where it started. And it was really sort of started with inline autocomplete, which is, hey, can we just help people build and complete things, which is, start with a method definition and complete it, if you will. And now it's gone from sort of like single file to multi-file, multi-app, and everything within. And even then, we're starting to see different trends where it's going from sort of dev-centric to op-centric, which more like individuals to teams, short running to long running. Like, we're really just sort of in the process of evolution of this, and we have tools for all of those things. We're releasing a preview version of an ALM agent that allows you to add these sort of natural language questions and do long running tasks as well, and do so in a collaborative. So it's not an individual talking, it's, in a Slack channel. And some of these are going to be user initiated. Some of them are going to be event driven. So something happened to our site, based on some criteria, it thinks it can automatically fix that. So we're talking about like self-healing. It really is sort of the future on what we can enable, even if it's just sort of like agent to agent, or as simple as, hey, there's when I set the label to do this, the ALM agent knows to fix this. And what it's going to do, that unit of collaboration is still the pull request. And when we got the pull request, it summarized what it did. And then it tells me, did I pass the code analysis tests? Did I do all those other things that I'm doing? And it's just kind of one example that we do is also scale tests. We're probably one of the only companies that give you a version and actually take your pre-production environment and basically supercharge it so that you can do geo-scaling tests, right? My app works great when I have 100 users, but Cyber Monday is coming. What's going to happen when I have 100,000? Can it actually scale? We will give you not the production environment, but a pre-production environment and a set of tools to do the measurement and instrumentation on what are the hard things that'll happen within your application. So really trying to think through all of the developer scenarios. And it very much started from a single file to, wow, what are the use cases? We're thinking about the health of the application and making sure that we have the right things for observability and to that it can scale with our scale test service. And then it discovers, you know what, that code, while it's functional and it works, it's actually not a good idea to do under when your user load gets over 500. And we build those and then shift them left. So it's directly in the ID. It's going to be able to track and tell you, this is the line of code that you need to do. And we will, again, using AI, suggest a fix for it, right? So instead of doing things like queries in a loop, we're going to tell you to do a batch query, things like that. Chunky versus chatty.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the idea of the stress testing tools being built into that same world. I think that's often something so overlooked. And even when it comes to like shipping AI generated code or AI software, we still have to rely on kind of like older or traditional DevOps and CI/CD pipelines and practices to like actually put it to the test. But being able to roll all of that in very smartly, by the way, as like VS Code extensions, play off of this framework and this experience that developers are already used to, that's already really well thought out and well developed. And it's interesting to me because I think, like, going back to the beginning, we talked about like the, if you just throw 10 vibe coders at at one problem, you'll get 10 different solutions to it. And they're all probably around the same level of verbosity and, whatever the case. And so, recognizing, I think that like one-off code problem is easy. Anyone who's done agentic coding has experienced this, where it will reinvent the wheel when the wheel is a very popular NPM package. But what principles really guide your engineers in creating this experience so that it actually does extend instead of recreate? Because I think that is an interesting, problem to crack into, and it's largely also a language problem. So, how did y'all think about that problem once you had recognized it?
Yeah, so there's a number of things, which is like, one, how do you get an understanding of what exists today? So we have a number of tools within there. So another service we're building is sort of what we call our metadata intelligence service. This is actually something that we are talking about at Dreamforce at a really high level. It gives you all the information and context, so you can do things like ask it natural language questions. How is this designed? If I remove this field, what is the impact? Ooh, there's 3 things and a workflow that is guided on this. Or, you know what? You can delete it. And you do things like you couldn't do before, which ask natural language impact analysis questions, right? So a deep sort of introspective knowledge of everything that they've built for. And that includes, an API catalog. Which are the right APIs to do this? And those can be annotated both by customers or by AI. So you can make sure that you're picking the right thing. So all of that stuff is within our metadata and our schema. And then also we even do like a vector DB, both for our standard objects, custom objects, and even code, right? And the code vector DBs are relatively common, just to be fair, so that people can know, here's what's possible. Here's the code that exists. So which is like, hey, cancel order already exists and it's within the order management class, right? We don't have to reinvent that. We can suggest that, and then somebody can say, actually, no, I want to rebuild this, or rebuild an overload for that method, and so on and so forth. But you really get the opportunity to start with what you have, get the smarts of it, and really what we're doing is the smarts for you to be able to query, but really the smarts for the AI to be able to do the better understanding. So it's giving you the best possible responses, and then setting a set of MCP tools that help there as well.
That's a great way of framing it. And it ultimately boils down to context engineering, about being able to
Correct.
take that world that exists, use RAG, look at what's already pre-existent, and then smartly and on the fly as it's needed, bring it into the AI's world, make it equipped with that knowledge, turn it into an expert on what it needs to be and be an expert on at any given time. And context engineering, as we know, it's a balancing act. It can be really easy to overwhelm versus to underwhelm. And so actually like tapping into that, it's, a magic layer for sure. I think that requires a lot of tweaking. And it's really great to hear that that's like the same kind of like lever that y'all are messing with. Because, when we've talked about vibe coding, we've talked about how do people get the most out of it. It always boils down to this context engineering, and it really helps people kind of like pull back the curtain and understand that it's all about aligning the information that matters most when you need it in that moment. And I think that's like a great way of framing it. And I kind of want to use that as like a jumping point into how some of the things in vibe coding transform when you have that contextual engineering, when you have that stuff baked in. So like one of them that you pointed out to me, for example, is like, you have schemas and understanding like databases of what is the customer cares about, what they track, and all the little details and fields of the things that make Salesforce what it is. And so you take that, you pair it with RAG, and you make it contextually aware of their actual organizational shape. And then once you do that, what changes out of the box in your experiences playing with this kind of tool?
Yeah, so like let's just say you were using a standard schema for an employee. There is sort of like a starting point. This is one of the things that Salesforce builds a set of pre-built schemas called our standard schema. But you can still customize those. Maybe you're adding custom objects, or maybe you're adding or removing fields within there. So the challenge is, if you're using tools like Cursor or Copilot, they know your code. They don't know the exact structure of the exact Salesforce org that you're connected to, right? If you're a consultant, you're like connecting to 40. So that these things may change literally depending on what hour or which project you're working on.
Yeah.
So really having that deep understanding of that. And you can do things like even walk up and say, plus for this response, what I want you to do is change this. I'm going to manually add the 3 standard schema objects that I want you to do. So what I want you to do is build a way to search for cases. And here's my specific case object, if you will, and you're going to get the results. So instead of randomly choosing fields, or choosing fields that are generic out of the box but not specific, it is the exact fields that are within that schema, because you have the schema. And of course the LLM is going to do its best job to guess, but if you have the schema, it's going to do exactly what you tell it to do from a schema perspective.
And that's like really cool, because I think so. Something I always think about whenever people build stuff is, you start in that world like Cursor on your local computer and you put together little tiny bits and you're like, okay, it's standing up. Now I have to go pull in all this information, right? I need to hit my Salesforce API. I need to grab all that and pull it in. I need to go to this other service and pull in all this information. And it becomes like, actually bringing the context and the data from those different houses into the little prototype that you're building, because that's what you have to do to make it safe and local and to try it out. But in this world, you're describing, your prototype, it lives in the house of your data. It's a first-class citizen alongside of the data. And so is that like an aha moment for developers and your experiences when they can pick it up and use it? How does that kind of change like the rapidity in which people that you see can prototype?
Yeah, I think it's probably more the other way, which is people like, again, if we think about the adoption maturity curve, there's a set of folks that have been using AI tools since the absolute beginning, right?
Yeah.
We talked about some of our friends, Martin Woodward is one example, right?
Yeah.
Super cutting edge. But then there's sort of the late majority and laggards. They try something, and if it doesn't have that context, they're like, this is terrible. I'm going to spend all
Right.
this time removing fields that don't exist. Like, why am I spending my time cleaning up? So the more you can just sort of have that trust by default, or really just taking the onus or work or the manual changes out of that layer, the more they start to trust and more to have that experience where they love, where they're not spending time doing what is effectively simple scaffolding of CRUD apps, right? They're not spending time worrying about the infrastructure. Salesforce take care of all that. They just
Right.
describe what it is, and that makes it fun, where they're spending time on the more important parts versus, oh, geez, I need to copy and paste and remove these HTML components for fields that don't exist, and now the validation thing is now broken because it was the third field, and geez, now like you're just like almost want to just give up and all right, let me just delete everything. That sort of
Exactly.
idea.
First off, I love the Martin Woodward shout out. If you're listening to this and you haven't listened to our episode with Martin Woodward, he drops a lot of really great advice, and it's a great pair for this episode because we're talking about using agentic coding where your code lives, and this is the same idea here: building agentic enterprise applications where your enterprise data lives. So these are a natural pair, and I think that tapping into that same stuff, what he taught us is the same lines of what you're teaching us now, and that is ultimately about providing that safe environment, but also bringing in all of that rich context that makes the platform what it is. But I want to take a second there to pause and also, talk about there's a lot of velocity in this adoption. There's a lot of excitement about picking it up, but we're talking about the enterprise and they're
Right.
skeptics. And so when you talk with a customer and maybe they, are trying to wrap their head around how they would use this, or maybe even they say it's flat out unworkable for them until a certain thing changes. How does Salesforce attack those problems, and what are the kinds of frameworks y'all have used to make sure that this is meeting your customers where they need it?
Yeah, so the very first, this is the great story that we had or just ran into when we originally started Agentforce for developers. VS Code extension. We want to make because you're buying Salesforce, we're going to make the AI credits included, and we really want this to be a productive experience. And you're going to do, and obviously we're over the hump now. We have
Yeah.
millions of lines of code. The people that use Agentforce for developers, it's like 20 to 25% of our users is actually agentically built, which is awesome. And that we can track this. But that's basically where we stopped. When we originally started, I was like, we need all of this data. Because we need to train our model. This was the Salesforce code gen model. And the enterprise was like, you want to use our IP that we're paying people for to train so that somebody else, our competitors, can copy our features? Like, why would we ever do that? Why? And it really was that aha moment of
Mhm.
that's not going to realistically fly with our customers. And what also happened is because they couldn't trust it, they would just use it for like hello world, lorem ipsum. So if you do train,
Totally.
imagine you spent all this time training it and everybody's just building hello world apps. Now the training set and data that you have has its own sort of implicit bias. So it really was one of our biggest changes was, and our adoption certainly grew in major ways by removing the we will not use your IP to train our model. And again, this is also just using lessons learned, but we also use the Agentforce trust layer. That has like data masking to make sure, prompt defense, the toxicity stuff, zero retention, which is really what we're talking about here. If we send it to an LLM, it's not sending, that the LLM can't retain that data, and things like an audit trail. So there's just a ton of things that customers were like, okay, this isn't just me calling ChatGPT from an API. This is, we have that enterprise level of governance for this data with the Agentforce trust layer that I can now enable. But as with all customers, this is what we expect. They're going to do a pilot. They're going to see, are they actually successful? Where does it work and not work? And based on that, those things are what really start the snowball effect of, yeah, it works great for this, but it was terrible at that. Really, we're spending a ton of time building UX screens. And this is one feedback that we got from one of our ISVs. They really wanted Figma. Show us how you can take Figma so we can reduce our time to market, because that's the designer to developer workflow has always been a challenge. So the ability to be able to, now with MCPs, to be able to go from a Figma comp into a working version in Salesforce in just minutes is a huge, huge benefit to them.
I love the idea of being able to learn something like that from changing a contract or an agreement or just like the terms of service. I think, in this world you're describing, trust is the fuel. You can build this amazing rocket ship that can take them all the way to the moon, right? But like, no one's going to get in it if they don't believe in you and they don't think that they're ultimately going to be there for the whole ride, right? And so I think that's a really great acknowledgement. I think that's something that a lot of engineering leaders listening to this can really take away from it, is that making sure that the AI products that you're building and the way that they're serving your customers is really serving them and bringing them along for the ride, protecting their best interests and recognizing that it's a big, scary world and we're all kind of like reaching and feeling in the dark in front of us and trying to figure out where it's all going to go. And that you have the most resources and the biggest viewpoint on where it could go. And so being that guiding light instead of allowing any kind of mistrust is, first and foremost, I think that is like the absolute base foundation of building anything great in partnership with the customer. So I really love that. There's another thing I really want to dig into with you, because when we talked originally, I got a glimpse at like a really amazing and layered feedback loop between Salesforce and how y'all have learned to build and how you meet your customers where they are. So there are a few things that you've called out, like there's stuff like internal dog fooding or, drinking your own champagne if you want to be really bougie about it. Yeah, there's all of the customer previews that exist. There's all the developer surveys that you send out, and also a really cool thing called devlog diaries that I really love to learn more about. So, as like a software leader, you're inventing a new category, Dan. How do you roll all of those signals into a concrete roadmap decision?
Yeah, that's always the challenge, right? Because you want to have that quantitative view. What's happening in the market? How big is this? What is everybody doing? And certainly there are a number of studies that do, like the Stack Overflow Developer Survey. JetBrains does their own version as well, where you can start understanding what people are doing. And even within those, about 3 out of 4 customers are already using AI. So it's like, what are they using it for? What works? What does it? And again, you sort of start moving from the quant to the qual. When we're releasing this new version of our enterprise vibe coding tool for Agentforce for developers, we started, dog fooding, doing, customer surveys. But that's good when people like try it out and just give us feedback. And it's really the people that started using and continue using it. That's great. The people that stop, we want to know, well, why? And it turns out like some of the use cases, and this is for customers as well, it's like, well, I only code a couple times a month. And it's really like, this app is sort of in support mode. And you don't realize not all developers are 9 to 5 developers. Right? I support 10 applications. So I wait until somebody files a bug, and then I'm going to use your agentic app tool. So really think about what are the things they need. Well, what does that person need? They actually need the ability to explain what's happening. So We do slash explain. Explain, what does this do? Geez, I wrote this a year ago, or somebody that left the company wrote this 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I now need to add the ability to validate, don't let them submit without this required field. I don't even remember how the validation thing works. So you can ask and have that conversation within code and really just start to get to know developers and really ISVs as well. This is one of the most powerful things that Salesforce does is we have big and, they call them unicorn ISVs that are built on Salesforce. And those are ones that are valued at more than $1 billion. And really think about the platform for ISVs. And we, will go on site and do events where we ask them, what are the most important things? How can we make you successful? And really think about the customer first. For the dev diary, man, there's just so many great examples where you think your feedback is going to be about the product or feature or, yeah, I like that. They like that. You don't realize just how many things that they have to do. So it's like, we always start like our tutorial in our docs, like, well, you've got everything configured. Let's get started. And so then you see somebody try and do it. Developer wants to go through. It's like, okay, so npm install this package. They hit npm in a command line, and you're just like watching these screenshots and listening to them. npm isn't installed, and I don't know why. Okay, so they go check, and they have installed it, but they installed it from brew, which didn't install it on the command line. And then it's like, oh, well, I'll go change it and just like copy add it into Zeesh, but they don't have Zeesh on this machine. They have bash. And then they're like, okay, fine, I got this installed and I just, decided to install it. It's the wrong version of Node. And so the library they have doesn't work with that one. And
wow, what you're describing is so triggering for all JavaScript, TypeScript developers that exist, myself.
And it's you don't realize it's like, hey, what we want is the feedback on the person. It's like, no, setup. It is such a pain to get started with software.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not picking on Node.js. Python and Python virtual environments
they all have their quirks.
Yeah, quirks is not the
a nice way of putting it.
Yes, the nice way of putting it. So it's just kind of one example. How did that feed into some of our feedback? We wanted to build Code Builder, browser-based tool, 0 install. You're not installing Node. You're not installing Python. You're not installing VS Code. You're not installing our Salesforce extensions. You're not installing our CLI. You're not installing Salesforce MCPs. It's all just there.
Then there's no other vibe coding experience that I can think of right now that even compares to that. They all have some level of like, oh, copy this command or, get something local. So that's really the cool part about it being in this contained world.
Yeah. And look, and how does that start? It starts with talking to customers and getting real world examples, which is getting started with stuff and configuring software is just a real pain. How can we make the lives easier? And that absolutely drives adoption and access, which is like, it's one button to get this thing, instantly ready just to make your lives that much easier.
When you talk about your customer segments and you have folks obviously that don't have a lot of experience using code, they're the more traditional drag and drop or low code users. And you also have folks that are somewhere between that and an engineer, like they're more aspirational, they're technical and comfortable in a command line. And then you have these full-fledged unicorn ISVs, billion-dollar companies that have built themselves on top of you and are creating value for customers. And those are three very distinct segments. But something that's happening right now is that I think a lot of those lines are starting to blur. And what has surprised you about how those groups are adopting these tools?
Yeah, so to give you an example of one of the ISVs we work with, Encino, they call themselves the bank operating system. So if you work with like Wells Fargo and US Bank, these are really big banks that use Encino for things like, your home loan and your mortgage, right? Great software, all built on the Salesforce platform. So you would think, and they are absolutely hardcore, amazing developers, but one of the things they wanted to do was, how do we just get feedback on new products, features, or capabilities? So they partnered with their product folks with a UX designer. The UX designer would basically, that was their dream. It's like, look, we're just doing this to get feedback. It just needs to be a prototype. And that's really where some of these vibe coding tools would do, which is start with the Figma, get a click through, they set up a meeting and just ask the person, the loan officer, is this the right tool? Is this the right sort of feedback? And those are just examples of how, when you would traditionally think, oh, they must be completely engineering, even within their organization, they're experimenting for ways that they can expedite getting to that product market fit and getting that feedback for customers to make their software that much better. So when it is ready to hand off, we're not handing off something that no customer wants. Really, so
Right.
they're like a great example of where they're just so customer focused to get that right feedback in as quickly as possible.
I love that of using it as a way to really tighten the feedback loop. I think that's critical in building software safely, especially for customers and really sensitive, industries like you just used banking as a really great example of being able to actually vibe code it into this little shared experience and bring it right to the customer is, that's like the first class experience going to the top of our talk of like what this is all about. And as this continues to evolve, do you think that those worlds will continue to blur and those lines will continue to go away? Because that's the trend I think everyone is seeing. But, what do you think the future might hold?
Yeah, I think that absolutely you're going to see the sort of democratization of app building. And I think some of the other areas that are for lack of a better word, sometimes neglected too, is just feedback and iteration, which is, hey, did I start this to build an app or did I start this to have an outcome? What is the
Yeah.
outcome we're trying to drive? And maybe there's an easier way to do that. And then how do I measure success with things like product analytics so that I know and can, vibe the next changes based on that? Like, oh, geez, our shopping carts are being abandoned. What are the ways that we can reduce the mean time to learn within there? So really, it's sort of like democratizing all those things. Sometimes you ask, it's like, well, geez, if you want to look at analytics, you got to be a data scientist. Well, maybe you don't. You can start asking natural language questions of
Right.
your analytics platform. So both the developer and an end user or a product manager or a business line manager can ask questions about their business. What would you recommend? What would you do? Here's what our app is doing, and really better understand things that we haven't thought of before as possible as like, well, you can export all the data into a CSV file and load it in Google Sheets. There's got to be a better way.
There's got to be a better way, right?
Exactly.
Wow. Dan, this has been an amazing conversation, like a really great view into how Salesforce is approaching this new category of coding, enterprise vibe coding. It takes two very opposite worlds and it brings them together. And ultimately, it makes that wild, wild west experience of agentic coding a little less wild. And I'm really excited to see what people are going to build on top of Salesforce and the tools you're making available. And before we wrap up, where can our listeners, if they've been following along and they're kind of curious, where can they go to learn more about your work and what Salesforce is building?
So our Agentforce for Developers tools is now in a preview mode. That means anybody watching this like today can do this. By the time you launch, this will be actually GA'd. So you go into VS Code Marketplace, install the Salesforce extensions for VS Code, connect to an org. You don't need a credit card. You don't need anything. Again, we include all that stuff to really get you started, or just developer.salesforce.com.
Cool. Well, we're going to include some notes in our show notes, some links so people can go check it out. And this is, like I said, been a really amazing tour through some of the problems y'all are tackling. So thank you so much, Dan, for joining us on Dev Interrupted. It's been so fun. And to you listening, thank you for joining us for the conversation and for tuning in. That's it for this week's Dev Interrupted, but the conversation doesn't stop here. Be sure to find Dan and I on LinkedIn, continue the conversation, ask any questions you might have, because we're really curious to know how you've been building and how you might use a tool like this. So we'll see you next time.